Pac-Man is one of gaming's biggest and earliest mascots. His earlier adventures are classics. The original arcade game, obviously titled Pac-Man, the amazing sequel, Miss Pac-Man, are all household names, and just about everyone on the planet is at least somewhat familiar with these two titles and these two yellow mascots. More recently, there has also been a Pac renaissance, with some of the most recent adventures including Pac 99, Pac-Man Championship Edition, and Pac-Man Museum Plus all being received very positively. But today, we're not here to talk about those titles. We're here to talk about a time when the classic Pac-Man formula was turned on its head and taken into a completely new, three-dimensional direction. We're here to talk about the Pac-Man World Franchise. But before we get started, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, grab your favorite beverage, maybe a snack, and let's roll. Namco Home Tech was the United States located subsidiary of Namco. Up until about the late 1990s, Namco Home Tech had primarily focused on publishing various Namco titles, including various versions of classic Pac-Man games, including Pac-Man and the Miss Pac-Man releases on the Game Boy and NES, as well as Pac-Attack, Pac-in-Time, and Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures. In 1999, the 20th anniversary of Pac-Man, Namco Home Tech would get its first swing at making a self-developed and published Pac-Man game in Pac-Man World. Releasing on the original PlayStation and Game Boy Advance, Pac-Man World takes the shape of a 2.5D side-scrolling adventure. Yes, your goal is to keep progressing to the right and to get to the end of the level, but there's a lot of depth and Pac-Man can move into the foreground and the background as needed. This gives you quite a bit more freedom than a typical side-scrolling adventure of their era would give you. Pac-Man will play through 6 different worlds with a grand total of 23 levels to play. These levels are also themed very differently, but always keep a very upbeat and cartoony look to them. Remember this for later on. But the same can't really be said for the game's enemies. Yes, they look different, but they fight more or less the same. Pac-Man has several weapons in his Pac arsenal to take these guys out. He can throw pellets at them that he collects throughout the level, which is an attack only available in this game and disappears later in the series, or my personal favorite, butt bounce right on top of them. I can't put my finger on it, but something about this move is so fun to spam over and over. Maybe it's the sound, or the animation, or just how absurd it is, but I literally can't stop hitting the X button to do this move. So I apologize if in the majority of my footage across the series, I'm butt bouncing. You've been warned. This game released on Pac-Man's 20th anniversary, and it really leans into this fact. On Pac-Man's 20th birthday, Pac-Man arrives home just to find all his friends and family have been kidnapped by the evil Talkman's ghosts, and now you must go to Ghost Island and rescue your friends. Throughout the level, there are tons of different elements to break up the platforming, switches, moving platforms, and even buttons that you'll need to butt bounce on. Pac-Man also has a rev roll ability where he'll run in place for a moment before taking off in whatever direction at a high speed. This is useful for getting over hills and functions pretty similarly to Sonic's spin dash move. The platforming here is really solid and doesn't suffer from being overly difficult like a lot of these early 3D platformers did. Each level also has several traditional arcade-like Pac-Man mazes. One of these is even at the very beginning of the game, but for all you speedrunners out there, it's completely optional and you can run right past it. If you somehow get tired of butt bouncing, how could you? You can check out Maze Mode, which is an awesome marriage between the main 2.5D experience we got in this game and the traditional Pac-Man arcade experience. And honestly, I could play a whole game based on this concept. The traditional Pac-Man arcade game is also on board as a separate game mode from the main quest. As you'll see throughout this franchise, the majority of the Pac-Man World games include the original Pac-Man and sometimes even more Pac-Man games throughout. Pac-Man World also received a Game Boy Advance release, with these levels that are set up exactly the same as the full console release. So what did the critics think? Most outlets gave Pac-Man World a pretty positive score, and I feel it's well deserved, and honestly, I probably would have even given it a little bit of a higher score. The next game in the Pac-Man World series would not be a direct sequel to Pac-Man World, and actually not even include World in the title at all. Instead, it would take the shape of a companion game for Pac-Man World, releasing on the N64, PlayStation, Dreamcast, and GBA in Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness. As you can see, my prayers have been answered, and this game is based on the maze sections of Pac-Man World, but it improves upon them to make them a more fleshed out experience. To get rid of any confusion, Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness is a totally standalone title. It's not an expansion pack or anything like that. It released in September of 2000, almost a full year after Pac-Man World. Originally, when I heard about this game, I debated on whether or not I should even put it in this video. In fact, I was totally convinced that this was just a cash grab and was full of extra content that could have been included in Pac-Man World. Thankfully though, I couldn't have been more wrong. Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness is so much more than just a pack of mazes. It's a top-down puzzle game where you take control of Miss Pac-Man and eat as many pellets as possible to progress to the next section of the level. Along the way, you'll have to move platforms, flip switches, and even use TNT to blow up boulders. There are also a good variety of enemies besides the typical ghosts. Maze Madness also features roughly 20 unique levels with a lot of different puzzle-solving elements throughout. I'm honestly a big fan of this game and could see myself going back to play it even after I finish production of this video. But what do the critics think? Most outlets gave Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness a C to C+ score, which I feel is a little low because this is by no means a bad game. Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness also featured a Game Boy Advance release, which is pretty similar to the full console release, but with the obvious concessions for the hardware's power. So where would the franchise go next? Also developed by Namco Home Tech, Pac-Man World 2 would officially make its US release on February 24th, 2002, and abandon the console its older siblings launched on and launch exclusively on the PS2, GameCube, Xbox, PC, and GBA. I'm not going to lie to you, audience, I love Pac-Man World 2. And while we talk about it, my fandom for this game is definitely going to come out, so just FYI. Thanks to the power of the newer consoles, Pac-Man World 2 is now a fully 3D experience. Each level of Pac-Man World 2 is very linear, with the end goal being to reach the end of the level while collecting as many pellets, fruit, and eventually coins as possible. But too often the world linear is associated with boring, but that's not at all what's going on with Pac-Man World 2. The game's levels have a good variety of difficulty, including difficulty spikes which keep you on your toes and engaged as you play throughout the levels. There are also a good variety of level environments: basic green lane zones, treetop levels, snow levels, underwater levels, submarine levels, endless runner levels, run for your life levels, maze levels. Variety is the best word to describe Pac-Man World 2. It exceeds at giving you lots of good eye candy and keeps you entertained through its pace changes to keep you playing. Pac-Man has the classic power pellet power-up that he can eat to, well, eat ghosts, but also the steel ball pellet from the first game that will turn Pac-Man into a heavy, steel-fied version of himself. This is incredibly helpful in the underwater sections of levels. But a new power-up is also added in the shrink pellet, which will make Pac-Man really small for a very brief amount of time. All of Pac-Man's moves from the first game are here, including my favorite, and by far the most addicting to hit over and over again, Butt Bounce. Rev Roll is also back, and as well as the new addition of the Kickflip. One minor complaint is that sometimes it's hard to gauge just how far you'll launch with the rev roll, and I often found myself launching poor Pac-Man off of a cliff on more than one occasion because I mistimed a jump. Mistiming jumps and picture-perfect timing in general were often required by 3D platformers in this era. Thankfully, however, outside of the rev roll and a few difficult to navigate sections, the game tends to be rather forgiving, making it easy to pick up and play even today. One quiet night in Pac-Town, the mischievous ghosts roll in and start playing with the golden fruit from a tree in the center of town. By doing this, they accidentally release the evil ghost Spooky, who tells them to take the fruit and demands that they help destroy Pac-Man and his friends. And as you may have guessed, only Pac-Man can track down these pieces of fruit, and the rest of the village just seems to go about their lives while we put our lives and Pac-Man's on the line. Oh well. The variety of Pac-Man World 2 also extends to its platforming sections. Depending on the environment that you're in, you'll have to deal with a wide variety of hazards. In the winter section, there's ice that you'll need to slide around on and avoid heading into the water. In the volcanic sections, there's, well, lava. And in the woodland sections, you'll have to watch out for saws that pop out of the trees at random points, which I'm pretty sure is an OSHA hazard, but hey, what do I know? Pac-Man World 2 features several boss fights as you work through the game's levels. Unfortunately, a lot of these boss fights are copy and pasted versions of themselves, where all you have to do is either rev roll or butt bounce on the giant robots' heads and you're on to the next level. Although, to be fair, the final boss fight is very different and it's a nice change right before the end of the game. Pac-Man World 2 also introduces the Pac Village, a sort of hub world where Pac-Man can walk around and interact with other Pac folk. The highlight of the Pac Village is without a doubt Sue's Arcade, which hosts several different Pac-Man arcade games that are fully playable, including the original Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Pac-Mania, and Pac-Attack. While in Sue's Arcade, you'll also have access to the mazes found in the main game, a museum which features concept art, and a jukebox which will allow you to play all music found in the game. On the GameCube, the Player's Choice version also came bundled with the game Pac-Man Versus, a multiplayer version of Pac-Man developed by Nintendo that makes use of the Game Boy Advance and the link cable. A pretty cool extra, making this, in my opinion, the definitive edition of this game. So what do the critics think of Pac-Man World 2? Well, they were kind of all over the place, with Eurogamer giving it a 5 out of 10 and the majority of other outlets giving it a B score. With my nostalgia goggles on, I give this game an A score, but I'm not going to argue too hard with critics on this one. In 2005, 3 whole years after the original release of Pac-Man World 2, it would receive another iteration on the Game Boy Advance. The GBA version is less of a classic platformer and more of a beat-em-up. Something that was a little bit odd at the time, but future Pac-Man World titles wouldn't be like this, right? Alright audience, before we move into the next game, let's play a quick round of Name It. Name something in a Pac-Man game. Those were all good guesses. Survey says? Hey, fantastic. Now let's see which ones you were missing. Ah, of course, hand-to-hand combat, dystopian environments, and ancient aliens. Such clear staples of the Pac-Man formula. Well, at least according to the folks over at Blitz Games who developed Pac-Man World 3. Yes, so after Pac-Man World 2, Namco Home Tech would hire and hand over development reins to Blitz Games, who wanted to take the series in a vaguely familiar, but more or less brand new direction. To Blitz Games' credit, there are a lot of staples of the Pac-Man World series here. Butt bouncing and rev rolling, which is now more fun than ever, make a return, and okay, I lied a little bit. That's pretty much where the staples end. Pac-Man now has the ability to outright throw fists at his enemies, key word here being enemies and not ghosts, as Pac-Man will take on ogre-looking monsters, and while there are still technically ghosts in the game, they now appear in this weird spectral form that's not nearly as interesting or cute as the designs from Pac-Man World 2 or, I don't know, literally every other Pac-Man game? However, for Blitz Games, development of Pac-Man World 3 wasn't exactly easy. During the middle of development, Namco of Japan began to merge with Bandai. Namco then canceled every Pac-Man game in development, and of course, this included Pac-Man World 3. But Blitz Games was allowed to continue development as long as the game was complete by a 2005 window. So without a doubt, Blitz Games had to rush to complete this title, which could have affected quality, but I'm not convinced that this would have saved it from some of the weird design choices that were made. The levels themselves are now a lot more wide open compared to previous entries in this franchise. This is probably due to the game's new emphasis on combat, but this also means that platforming takes a hit. It's still there, but it's not really as interesting or fun. Also, let's take a look around this level. Does this look like it belongs in a Pac-Man game? I mean, Ratchet & Clank, sure. Oddworld Munch's Odyssey, definitely. Rayman, a stretch, but I guess all of those games before Pac-Man. I mean, look at this guy. He doesn't belong here. The only thing that could make this more outrageous is if they somehow shoehorned in vehicles that shouldn't be here and Pac-Man is now driving a mech. I'm going to tell my kids this is what a Pac-Man game looks like. Okay, enough messing around. We've established that this isn't a traditional Pac-Man game. It's different. Let's move past that. Is it good? Well, it does do some pretty interesting things. There are quite a few new power-ups, one of which turns Pac-Man into essentially a Tron bike where he can make a big loop around his enemies, close off his tail, and then boom, all of his enemies explode. There is also now a super butt bounce, which is like the regular butt bounce but deals more damage. And if you ever wanted to cross between Palpatine and Pac-Man, you're in luck, because now Pac-Man can shoot electricity out of his hands. Power pellets and regular pellets are still here, which means you can eat those weird spectral beings. Although I really don't care for how the game comes to a screeching halt when you eat a ghost, and there are a ton of eating these ghost/spectral being segments. When these things appear, you'll be platforming and then a portal will open up and you'll have to go track down a power pellet in each ghost that comes out of the portal before advancing. This doesn't sound too difficult, but ghosts just keep coming. And they don't come out all at once. You'll be getting close to feeling like you've gotten through them all, and bam, more come out and you've got to track down another power pellet. As mentioned, these ghosts aren't the same as the traditional cute ghosts that have always been in Pac-Man. At first, I thought they were the same and the game had just given them a visual overhaul. But no, the cute ghosts are still here, but they are now on your side willing to help Pac-Man out. For example, there are sequences where you can take control of Pinky and unveil platforms for Pac-Man to jump on. So why are these ghosts on your side now? Well, you think that would be explained by the story, but they kind of just are. The plot synopsis goes as follows. On Pac-Man's 25th birthday, this released on the 25th anniversary of Pac-Man, He begins to teleport around and has no idea why. Eventually, he is teleported to the first non-Pac-Man looking level, and a ghost Orson tells you that the evil Irwin, who is trying to use the spectral siphon to rip apart the space-time continuum and destroy Pac Village. Also, Pac-Man talks now. So overall, how do we here at Big Green Gaming feel about Pac-Man World 3? Overall, it's okay. I see a lot of hate for this game online, and while it's disappointing that it doesn't feel or really look like a Pac-Man game at all, it's a somewhat solid beat-em-up platformer mashup. But what did the critics think? Well, the critics were a little harsher, giving the game a D+ score. Pac-Man World 3 had two portable versions released, a DS version and a PSP version. The PSP version is largely the same as its console counterparts, but the DS version is actually the same as well. So this is definitely an odd situation. Usually in these forgotten franchises, the DS version of the game is like a totally different game. But here, it's once again largely the same, but now just with really downgraded visuals to play on the DS. Pac-Man World 3 also has a pretty cool museum feature, where you can get a little bit more background on the Pac-Man series, watch an interview with the series creator, and play the original Pac-Man arcade game. Unfortunately though, this is the only Pac-Man arcade game you can play, a pretty big disappointment coming from Pac-Man World 2. There's also a trailer for the next game in the Pac-Man World series, a game that would take Pac-Man World in a brand new direction, Pac-Man World Rally. The only issue with the trailer appearing in Pac-Man World 3 is the trailer is on the PC, PS2, GameCube, and Xbox versions of Pac-Man World 3. But Pac-Man World Rally would not release on the Xbox and was cancelled for an unknown reason. So if you were a kid like me, who only had an original Xbox, you were completely out of luck. Pac-Man World Rally, developed by WildWorks, was released just a year after Pac-Man World 3, and is a fairly competent kart racer. A lot of kart racers fall into the trap of trying to be a Mario Kart clone, and while there are definitely some similarities there, Pac-Man World Rally sets off to do things in a few different ways. By picking up fruit scattered throughout the course, you can open up gates that give you shortcuts. And it wouldn't be a Pac-Man game without pellets to eat, which are scattered throughout the course. Initially, I thought these functioned the same way as the coins in Mario Kart, but there is a reason to pick these up. If you collect enough pellets, you'll turn into a Pac-Mobile, and the rest of the racers turn into blue ghosts. Running into the other racers will let you eat them and set them back temporarily. But Pac-Man World Rally does have a few similarities, unfortunately. Most of these are present in the game's power-ups. Everyone knows the hierarchy in Mario Kart, right? Green shell shoots forward or backward in a straight line, red shell hits the racer directly in front of you or behind you, and blue shell goes to the person in first place and blows them up. Well, Pac-Man World Rally has the same thing, except replace shells with bombs. No, not even a change of color. Green, red, and blue all do the same thing, just a straight up swap between shells and bombs. There are other really unique power-ups though, including a snowman that you can place behind you who will throw snowballs at other racers. Pac-Man World Rally also has a pretty expansive roster of characters, including very familiar faces like Mr., Miss, and Junior Pac-Man, but also bad guys from other Pac-Man World games, including Talkman, Spooky, and Irwin. There are other familiar faces from other Namco titles as well, like the Prince from Katamari, Puka from Dig Dug, and the PSP version has two exclusive characters in Mappy and Mr. Driller. As I've said in MotorStorm the Forgotten franchise, what's a racing game without its courses? And to Pac-Man World's Rally credit, it does have some really memorable ones, including one where you're racing through a Pac-Man maze in a course pulled straight out of Katamari. There is a good lack of variety in the majority of these other courses though. Lots of these tracks have very similar looking greenery, making several sections of tracks look identical to others. There are also two tracks themed around a haunted house in Ghost Mansion and Spooky's Castle. In total, there are 15 courses spanning across 5 Grand Prix, and the PSP version features an exclusive course in Subterranean Speedway. Pac-Man World Rally also features a battle mode, and honestly, I've never really cared for battle modes in any kart racer, but Pac-Man World Rally is a little different as it has several power-ups in this mode that are not available in the regular Grand Prix mode, including my personal favorite, the Blueberry Blaster. Battle mode has 4 different arenas to play in, and they're all okay. Again, nothing really special here in a mode that I generally tend to think is just tacked on to kart racers. And the PSP version has 2 exclusive arenas. Okay, let's talk about the UMD-sized elephant in the room. I have absolutely no idea why the PSP was given so much extra content. I realize I sound nitpicky here, but 2 characters, a full course, and 2 whole battle arenas are a lot of content to not include in the console versions, which many people would consider the primary and the best way to play these games. So you might go, Big Green, it sounds like the PSP version is actually the best way to play these games. And, well, you'd be wrong, as the PSP version has fewer enemy characters during the race and the battle modes, which brings down the total racer count to only 6 racers. Don't get me wrong, the PSP version plays perfectly fine, it's just a bizarre decision to make, and I can't find any good information about it, so please let me know down below if you have a good clue. All in all, how would I rank Pac-Man World Rally on the big board of kart racers? Is it better than Mario Kart? No. Sonic Racers? No. Crash Team Racing? No. Racing with Ryan? Yeah, I'd say so. So it fits in somewhere around here. I know I just said no quite a bit, but I honestly don't mind Pac-Man World Rally. It's a competent kart racer and it's a pretty good time, and I'm sure a sequel will be even better and more refined. Okay, so yeah, the sequel to this game was an iOS and Android phone release, and it's not very good. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it here, as it technically dropped the world from its branding, so it's not even a true sequel. But it's just really boring with very plain environments, and it's not that fun. Anyway, the critics gave Pac-Man World Rally pretty bad reviews, which I honestly don't think it's deserved. There is a good time here, and it is much better than those scores are giving it credit for. So what was next for the series? Let's recap where we've been. We had a really solid 2.5D platforming game, a maze spin-off game which was really fun, and in my opinion, a timeless classic in Pac-Man World 2, a misstep, but a fun misstep in Pac-Man World 3, and a fairly competent racer in Pac-Man World Rally. The series has had some really high peaks and some pretty middling lows. But what was next for the series? Well, audience, just as soon as I was getting close to finishing editing for this video, Pac-Man World Re-Pac was announced. This game is promising to remake the original Pac-Man World game, and I'm incredibly excited for it. But before that, it was incredibly quiet. But were there any plans for Pac-Man World 4? Well, while nothing official was ever announced, 2 concept trailers created by a Namco animator named Atsushi Sayato were uncovered. These concept trailers show Pac-Man platforming and running through a beach level and a snow level, while doing very typical Pac-Man things like eating pellets and fruit, but also doing things very unlike Pac-Man. The trailer showed Pac-Man turning into a marble and rolling around the whole environment, but also flying, a vast departure of mechanics from any of the previous Pac-Man World games. One of the bigger differences is in Pac-Man's design. Gone are the pure black eyes shaped like Pac-Man, and instead Pac-Man has a much more human-looking design. He also now pants like a dog, which for some reason just really gives me the creeps. Anyway, this game would have been different, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I really believe that it could have given the series a breath of fresh air, and it could have been a good direction to go in. Maybe less panting though. The good news though is that while this was the end of the series, it was by no means the end of Pac-Man as a character, or even Pac-Man platformers in general. Several Pac-Man games have released and continue to be released since World Rally, and some of these were even 3D platformers, including Pac-Man and The Ghostly Adventures 1 and 2, which didn't review very well, but I honestly can't say that I've played these, so please let me know your thoughts down below. And as recently as a few weeks ago, Pac-Man Museum Plus released, giving you the opportunity to play through lots of classic Pac-Man titles. Unfortunately though, none of these Pac-Man World games were included in this package. What about Namco Home Tech, Blitz Games, and WildWorks? Namco Home Tech would be merged with Namco Networks and primarily focus on releasing mobile versions of Namco titles. For Blitz Games, after the release of Pac-Man World 3, Blitz would continue to make a variety of licensed titles, some of which were pretty well known, including the Burger King line of games, SpongeBob Creature from the Krusty Krab, and a few different entries in the Attack series. But they eventually had to shut down in 2013 due to a lack of funding. But the founders of Blitz Games then opened a new studio in the same area with lots of Blitz Games staff. The studio was named Radiant Worlds, and a few years later they were acquired by Rebellion Developments. What about WildWorks? Well, the good news is WildWorks is still around today. The bad news is that they make NFT games. But maybe these are fun, I won't judge. What do you think, audience? Will Pac-Man World Re-Pac be a success? Where else will the franchise go? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, but most importantly, take care, stay safe, and here's your next video.